Oklahoma, summer of 1977. Camp Scott was supposed to be a place of laughter. Tall trees swayed gently in the warm wind. Canvas tents stood in neat rows. Fire pits waited for stories, songs, and the crackle of night fires. For dozens of young Girl Scouts, this was their first time away from home. A small step into independence, wrapped in safety and supervision. No one imagined it would become a nightmare. The girls arrived excited and nervous, clutching sleeping bags and flashlights. Counselors smiled, reassuring parents that everything was under control. Camp Scott had been used for years. It was familiar, trusted, safe. Or so everyone believed. As night fell, the forest changed. Crickets grew louder. The darkness thickened between the trees. Tents blowed faintly from inside as whispers and giggles slowly faded into sleep. One by one, lanterns were extinguished. Silence settled over the camp. Somewhere beyond the tree line, someone was awake. Watching, waiting. Earlier that evening, a counselor had noticed something strange. A note taped near the trail. The message was unsettling, poorly written, and easy to dismiss as a prank. It was removed, forgotten. That decision would haunt the camp forever. Inside one of the tents slept 3 girls. They were young, trusting, unaware. The forest did not warn them. The night did not stop what was coming. When morning arrived, the sun rose over Camp Scott as it always had. Birds sang, the woods looked peaceful. But something was wrong. A tent was silent. Too silent. Counselors approached, expecting sleepy faces and slow movements. Instead, they found horror, a scene so shocking it would scar everyone who saw it. 3 girls were gone, and Camp Scott would never be the same. Some places are meant to protect childhood. Others become the place where innocence ends.
The screams came first. Not from fear, from disbelief. A counselor had pulled back the tent flap, expecting groggy girls tangled in sleeping bags. Instead, she stumbled backward, hands covering her mouth, her legs giving out beneath her. The forest swallowed the sound. Police arrived quickly, but Camp Scott was already lost. Children wandered in confusion. Some cried, others stood frozen, clutching blankets, too young to understand why adults were suddenly shouting their names. Counselors rushed to move the remaining girls away, but the damage was already done. Fear had settled in. The bodies of the 3 girls were discovered not far from the tent. Hidden, dragged, left in a place no child should ever be. Investigators worked in stunned silence. The scene told a story no one wanted to read. Violence, restraint, and deliberate cruelty. This was not an accident, not a moment of rage. This was planned. The note from the night before resurfaced almost immediately. Crude handwriting, a threat disguised as nonsense, something that should have triggered alarms, but hadn't. Now it lay on an evidence table, suddenly screaming with meaning. Someone had warned them. By afternoon, news spread beyond the camp, beyond the town, beyond Oklahoma. Parents flooded phone lines. Reporters arrived in waves. The name Camp Scott was spoken on every radio station in the state, and one question echoed louder than all the rest. How could this happen here? Investigators searched the woods for hours, dogs tracking faint scents through tangled undergrowth. Footprints appeared and vanished, branches were broken. Signs of a struggle dotted the forest floor like breadcrumbs, leading nowhere. Or worse, leading back toward the camp. That night, the remaining tents stood empty. Lanterns were left burning, no songs were sung, no fires lit. Camp Scott was silent again. But this time, the silence was heavier. Because whoever had done this had walked into a children's camp and walked out unseen. And now everyone understood the truth. The woods were not empty.
By the next morning, the woods around Camp Scott were no longer just trees and dirt. They were evidence. Yellow tape stretched between trunks. Flashing lights cut through the green stillness. State investigators joined local police, moving slowly, deliberately, as if afraid the forest itself might be watching. Every step mattered now. Every mistake already had. The focus turned to one man. His name surfaced quietly at first, passed between officers in low voices, a local handyman, a drifter, someone who knew the camp well, too well. He had worked nearby, he knew the trails, he knew how the camp slept at night, and he had been questioned before. Years earlier, the same man had been accused of breaking into Camp Scott, of lurking in the woods, of writing disturbing notes. Nothing had stuck, no charges, no arrest. Now those old reports were pulled from dusty files, their warnings suddenly screaming off the page. Too late. Search dogs followed a trail through the forest, past the tents, toward a familiar path, one that led away from the camp and into deeper woods. Footprints appeared, rope fibers were found, small details that suggested someone had planned every movement in advance. This was not a stranger stumbling through the night. This was someone who had rehearsed the darkness. As the investigation unfolded, fear spread far beyond Camp Scott. Parents across Oklahoma canceled summer camps. Girls were pulled from programs overnight. Trust, once automatic, evaporated. If this could happen here, it could happen anywhere. The suspect was brought in for questioning. He sat calmly, too calmly. He denied everything, explained away scratches, claimed coincidence. His story shifted just enough to stay ahead of proof, but never far enough to confess. There was no weapon, no eyewitness, no final piece, only suspicion. Days turned into weeks. The forest gave up nothing more, and slowly, painfully, investigators began to understand the truth they feared most. They might know who did it, but knowing was not the same as proving. And in Oklahoma, 3 young lives were already becoming something colder than justice. They were becoming a case. The arrest came quietly. No sirens, no cameras at first, just a knock on the door and a pair of handcuffs closing around wrists that had known the woods too well. The suspect was charged, and for a brief moment, Oklahoma exhaled. They wanted this to be over. The courtroom filled quickly. Parents, reporters, strangers who needed to see a face attached to the fear. The prosecution painted a careful picture. A man with a history, access to the camp, knowledge of the trails, a past that lined up too neatly with the night everything went wrong. They spoke of opportunity, of proximity, of patterns. But patterns are not proof. The defense moved slowly, methodically, pulling at threads. Evidence had been contaminated, the crime scene trampled in the first hours. The note, alarming, yes, but never definitively tied to the accused. Fibers could have come from anywhere. Footprints led nowhere certain. Doubt crept in. Then it spread. Witnesses contradicted each other. Timelines blurred. Memories shifted under pressure. The jury watched, listened, waited for the moment when everything would finally lock into place. It never did.
Outside the courtroom, the world kept moving. Summer ended, school began. Camp Scott sat empty, its tents long gone, its paths reclaimed by weeds and silence. Inside, the trial collapsed under the weight of what it could not prove. The verdict came down like a cold rain. Not guilty. Gasps, tears, anger that had nowhere to go. The accused walked free, not declared innocent, just unconvicted. The law had spoken, but it had not answered the question that mattered most. Did they let the right man go, or had they never truly found him at all? That night, Oklahoma did not sleep, because justice had not arrived, only uncertainty. And somewhere beyond the courtroom, beyond the empty campgrounds, the truth remained exactly where it had been since that summer night in 1977, hidden.
Camp Scott never reopened. The tents were removed. The trails slowly disappeared beneath weeds and fallen leaves. Nature reclaimed the land, but it could not erase what had happened there. The woods stood quiet again, not peaceful, but watchful, as if remembering. The case officially went cold, but it never truly left the public mind. Parents told their children the story in hushed tones. Counselors across the country rewrote safety rules. Overnight, innocence lost its assumption of protection. Summer camps were no longer just places of songs and fireflies. They became places that needed locks, patrols, and fear built into their routines. All because of one night. The man once accused faded into obscurity, carrying suspicion like a shadow that never quite detached itself. No new arrests followed. No confessions surfaced. No final answers came. The evidence remained locked in boxes. The questions remained unlocked in people's minds. Years later, former campers would return to the site. They spoke of the silence, of the way the air felt heavier there, of how even in daylight the woods seemed unwilling to forget. Some said they heard sounds that didn't belong, footsteps where no one walked, branches snapping without wind. But the real haunting was simpler. 3 girls went to camp and never came home. The Girl Scout murders became more than a case. They became a warning that evil does not always announce itself, that danger can exist even where trust is highest, and that justice sometimes is not guaranteed, no matter how badly it is needed. Some stories end with answers. Others end with absence. And in the quiet woods of Oklahoma, the truth still waits, unspoken, unseen, and unresolved.